Farage has a history of removing competent people in favour of people who are going to rally around him so that he can remain the person in control. He enjoys the new media when it comes to appealing to people, but he understands how to slug it out with legacy media when it comes to getting the knives out for Lowe.
There's a streak of narcissism to him that is distinctly lacking in more magnanimous figures like Donald Trump, and it probably does militate against the sort of thing that we need to see in British politics, which is more team building, assembling all stars, and not just relying on one man.
What matters now is talking seriously about whether or not reform has what it takes to actually reform the country, or if not, what is the next vehicle?
Welcome back to the programme. This is the NCF show, where we try to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, especially among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt. I'm a contributing editor at the European Conservative, and I'm thrilled to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, one of the leading contributors at Courage Media, and our special guest this week, Adam Lim, the writer and the man behind the Point-A Substack. Welcome, Adam.
It's good to be here.
We were both very interested to read a piece of yours in The Critic lately about this whole sort of Rupert Lowe, Nigel Farage civil war. And one of the points you made in that piece is that Farage is not interested in amassing a team of talent around him, a team of capable allies, but prefers, in your own words, seat warmers and sycophants. What point were you trying to get across there?
Well, that he wants to be surrounded by seat warmers and sycophants.
Yes.
I mean, if you have a look across reform today, if you take a look at the kinds of things that Rupert Lowe was putting out, since his departure, he represented about 46% of their parliamentary contributions. He was a rising star in the party, and Matt Goodwin has pointed out that not many people know who Rupert Lowe is, but I don't think Farage would have done what he did had he known that Rupert Lowe was someone who was an asset. I think he cut him down early in order to make sure that he could remain the person in the spotlight. If you have a look at who's left in reform now, it's Richard Tice, who largely fails to inspire. You've got someone like Lee Anderson, who is known mostly for being an ex-Tory and getting into fights with Steve Bray. And then you've got McMurdoch, who's known to the public as a woman kicker. Rupert Lowe was someone who was making significant contributions to professionalizing the party. He was an independent businessman. He didn't need to be in reform. He gave away most of his parliamentary salary, which isn't something that I agree with, but it's something that plays quite well with a lot of people who think that parliamentarians shouldn't be paid anything at all.
Trump did that in his first term, for example.
Yeah, it's very popular. And I think that Farage cut him down early because he's something of an egomaniac. If you have a look at his political career, it's strewn with corpses. You've got a number of people, including the former MP for Clacton, who was their only representative when he was in UKIP. And once he failed to get a seat in South Thanet, and it was clear that Douglas Carswell was the main guy in UKIP, at least in Parliament.
To be clear, we're talking about 2015 here, where Douglas Carson was the only MP delivered back to Parliament by UKIP.
Well, yeah.
For UKIP, sorry. Just to bring people in.
And when that happened, you saw that immediately a rift began to emerge over this money, and then UKIP fell into its worst instincts. So Farage has a history of removing competent people in favour of people who are going to rally around him so that he can remain the person in control. And those kinds of conditions aren't conducive for a party that's going to be the next government.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
Why do you think, very before Connor comes in, why do you think, I suppose what I'm trying to get at with the question is, why do you think he is so averse to talent? Because no one could ever accuse Donald Trump of not having a considerable ego, and I don't hold that against him. Particularly, this is the nature of politics. If you think you're fit to be the leader of the free world, you're almost by definition going to think rather highly of yourself. But Donald Trump manages to mix that egomania to the extent that it's egomania, that self-confidence to the extent that it's self-confidence, with an understanding that unless you're going to engage in a wholesale Caesar-like revolution against democracy itself and reinstall some form of monarchy as the primary form of government in the West, you need to have a solid team of similarly talented people around you, not least so that you have a successor. And we're now seeing J.D. Vance coming through the ranks, making very good noises. Why is Farage's ego not compatible with cultivating talent, whereas Donald Trump's is?
I think comparisons, and I wrote about this again when I think Konstantin Kisin made the comparison between Farage and Trump, they're not comparable figures. Trump is someone who has worked in business. He understands that there's a certain level of alliance that you need in order to be successful. I'm sure he's experienced that with the many boards that he's been on, and with the many people he's had to work with to have successful businesses. But politically speaking, the most important thing is that Trump took over one of the two parties in a two-party system. Reform has not taken over one of the two parties in the two-party system. It is attempting to usurp one of them. And that means that there's a necessary degree to which Farage does need to have an ego. He does need to push other people out. It's actually been one of the strengths of Reform and UKIP generally that they didn't make alliances with the BNP, that they didn't make alliances with Reclaim or whatever it is that Lawrence Fox was doing, these fundamentally unserious parties. That's been to the benefit of Reform. But fundamentally, Trump is actually more forgiving of people who have run against him than Farage is. J.D. Vance was a never-Trumper.
Talking about fascist.
But he turned the corner, he kissed the ring, and when he decided to do that, Trump said, okay, all is forgiven, you can become vice president, showing people that are your potential rivals and competitors that if they cease to be your rival or your competitor, that you can rise to the second highest rank in government. That is a huge incentive for people to not fight with you so much. So whilst Trump has an ego, he understands how to let bygones be bygones and to bring other people in. Farage has never shown that he's able to do that.
I promise I'll bring you in, Connor. It actually goes, it sort of relates to the Caesar point I was making. Caesar himself, again, we're dealing with fundamentally different forms of government here. Trump is not a Caesar-like figure in the sense that he's got rid of democracy in America altogether, or got rid of republicanism altogether in America. Nevertheless, Caesar, once he defeated Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, he showed clemency towards his former enemies in the Senate, and so long as they kissed the ring. I mean, there's a sense in which it backfired later on, so maybe he's not the best example. But in any case, that kind of clemency, it's a sign of confidence. It's proof of self-confidence. It's not incompatible with it. And if only Farage were capable of similar magnanimity, Connor.
Perhaps it's Rupert Lowe now running Caesar in reverse. He's already done the et tu Farage moment, and he's going to pull the blade from out beneath his shoulder blades and sort of do a Cincinnatus. He's put down his plough, he takes up the office of state, and then hands it off to whichever enterprising young Zoomer wants to pick it up in the J.D. Vance mold. But so you say that we would need to delegate out to a all-star cast kind of cabinet if we're not going to institute a constitutional monarchy or an absolute monarchy as the form of government in the West again. I do think I've written about this for Courage, that Trump has a kind of monarchic rule in that he's both a living meme, he does this sort of imminent transcendence thing, pixie dust of history kind of swirls around him, but also he does have a court of advisors, and into that court he brings his critics. There's the sort of Jordan Peterson point of the moment the king decapitates the jester and becomes incapable of having the legitimacy of his rule withstand criticism, it becomes a tyranny and ends up toppling. And I do think this is what Farage has done. He's sort of become the king of a fiefdom, but he's not only decapitated his critics, even within his party and without. You know, the phrase critical friends, which we even coined on this show quite a while ago with Ben Habib, has had a cordon sanitaire put around it by Zia Yusuf on Twitter. But also in a kind of King John sense, Farage has ignored his barons. He's ignored, places like this. He's ignored think tanks. He's ignored alternative media. They have seemed to only want to go to legacy institutions which are always going to call them racist, looking for approval, like the BBC, Sky and ITV. And I think this is because they don't quite understand how politics itself has changed. Look at how Rupert Lowe has thwarted this reputation destruction effort. A few tweets over a few days. Whereas they thought that leaking to the press and doing the sustained attack by briefing against him was going to work. So is it that this is a personality fault with reform, or are they trying to do some old legacy version of politics which is no longer going to work?
I don't think Farage is trying to do old legacy versions of politics. I mean, he was one of the first to take up TikTok. He's been very successful at that. I think he understands how to appeal to people very well. It's that when he wants to attack someone, I think he almost doesn't care about how he goes about doing it, provided it's done. I mean, you see that in Richard Tice's girlfriend, Isabel Oakeshott. She goes on TV and she says, poor old Rupert, as if people aren't going to be able to see that, okay, well, you're going out with the deputy leader of this party. I think that you've probably had a chat in bed and this is what he's been saying to you. Like, that's obvious to someone like him.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I see Isabel Oakeshott almost as a bellwether for what's going on internally at Reform. The reason that I managed to write the piece in a timely fashion was because she said that and I thought, okay, this can't be good for him. Deputy leader is saying this and his wife's gone, or girlfriend's gone on TV and said that. And clearly it's knives out for Rupert. I better start writing. And that's eventually what happened. So I think that it is sort of amateurish by Reform to try and get rid of him in this way. But to say that their media efforts are sort of a legacy media approach, I don't think so. I think that he does take up things like TikTok. So I think that it's a difference between he enjoys the new media when it comes to appealing to people, but he understands how to slug it out with legacy media when it comes to getting the knives out for Lowe.
But nevertheless, I suppose the point is because they're so used to that mainstream media mold, maybe they misjudged how quickly Lowe would be able to orchestrate a counterattack, because things travel more quickly online than they do when you're trusting the 6 o'clock news to give people their daily updates on what's going on. People like Lowe, they presumably thought that Lowe would fall. That's the first thing, because as you say, Farage does, for all his talents as a sort of charismatic campaigner, he's very good at leading ostentatious pressure groups. He's very good at like firing up a crowd. None of this can be doubted, and he has some achievements to his name that needs to be said. But because he has this sort of the corpses strewn in the background of his political career, he was able to take those people out pretty effectively because he was the messenger in chief. Whereas because Rupert Lowe did have a growing presence online, he was able to ratio Farage on X in a way that someone like Godfrey Bloom or someone like Stephen Wolfe, who we're going to be having on Deprogrammed, wasn't able to do, or Patrick O'Flynn, or Susan Evans, who, although the other people in the UKIP days, they didn't really have the resources to hand to launch a counterattack, because Channel 4 certainly wasn't going to give them a shake.
Yeah, I think there's excuse to that, but I think that it's more of an underestimation of Rupert Lowe than it is anything else. I mean, Twitter has been around for a long time, and Reform has seen time and time again that what your people put on X can be really, really bad for you. It happened during the election itself when tweets from former or prospective MPs came about. I think they're intimately aware of how powerful something like X can be. I think they just didn't think that Rupert Lowe was the fighter that he was. And I mean, not to lionize the guy and say that he's a fighter or anything, but it's clear that he's managed to give them more of a bloody nose than they've expected. So I think that it's more an underestimation of his opponents than anything else. I mean, you see how Farage behaves when his opponents go down. Like with Ben Habib, he started singing "The Sun Has Got His Hat On." This is someone who clearly enjoys this kind of fight. And I think that when it came time to sort of put Lowe out to pasture, they weren't expecting for him to do this because they were too busy probably celebrating, singing some other sort of nursery rhyme.
There's a very good, keep watching this for now, but there was a very good Lotus Eaters Roundtable on this recently, which our friend Mr. Tomlinson was participating in. And also, I don't know whether you know him, but Connor and I both do, Lewis Brackpool was participating in as well. And there is this sort of, like when you see, and sorry, I should mention, Lewis has a personal story about meeting Farage, which does give you an idea of the kind of, I don't want to labour the point too hard, but the sort of
playing into his own mythology,
yes,
which allows him to be flippant.
Indeed, and also, but Donald Trump. I'll get you to tell Lewis's story.
Yeah, he's very magnanimous.
Yes,
that's the
Donald Trump. I reckon if I went up to Trump, or you went up to Trump, or you went up to Trump, saying, love what you're doing in this respect, that he'd say he would be very, very...
It's a beautiful moustache. I love that hair. This is the best hair. Everyone's telling me, you know.
Exactly. Whereas when Lewis went up, our mutual friend Lewis, in sort of like, when was it, like 4 or 5 years ago? Yeah, when he went up to Farage at a party and said, "Oh, Nigel, big fan of yours, like what you're doing." Farage just looked at him, was on his phone, and just went, you need to get out more. And then all of his sort of sycophants started laughing, giggling, and Lewis felt pretty humiliated, like young kid, just wanting to have a word with Farage. And then Farage just turned his back and went back to talking to his friends. Also, recently, Connor and I were both at the launch of the, what was it, the Heritage, the Heartland Institute launch. And while this very nice chap, who is president of the Heartland Institute, I forget his exact name, he was basically trying to warm up the crowd for Farage. And he was singing Farage's praises, saying, "Farage, one of the best guys I've known, wonderful, he was such a great campaigner." And Farage was in the corner of the room and he was visible to everyone. He wasn't backstage or anything. And like, this guy was being really, really kind about Farage and talking about their friendship, how it goes back 15 years. And Farage was just like rather contemptuously on his phone as though, right, it's not my moment yet. I'm waiting for that. So there is a kind of streak of, what would be the word? There's a streak of narcissism to him. That is distinctly lacking in more magnanimous figures like Donald Trump, and it probably does militate against the sort of thing that we need to see in British politics, which is more team building, assembling all stars, and not just relying on one man who is seemingly impervious to being corrected in any way, to being criticized in any way, and like being open to criticism, particularly good faith criticism, friendly criticism. I would venture to suggest is an important precondition for launching any kind of movement that is going to be worth supporting. That we don't just want a government that says right wing on the tin for the sake of it, and then we can all get a kind of ersatz feeling of triumphalism on the basis of that. We want a right wing government that actually does things. And I mean, let's say that for Reform were nevertheless, despite this hiccup, to win an election in 2029, do you think they'd do anything with that majority?
No, I don't think that. I don't think they would. Firstly, I don't believe that they can win a majority. I mean, I think they might get some more seats, but it's incredibly difficult for a third party to usurp one of the major parties in politics. It's not popular to be in the Conservative Party right now, no doubt. But
if you're allowed in it. Hello.
But equally, at the end of the day, it's actually really, really difficult to usurp one of the two major parties. It happened once in the past, but will it happen again with Reform? Well, it's going to take a lot of very capable people, and it's going to take continued Conservative failure, which, if the last 14 years have shown us anything, is that you can generally bank on that sometimes. But the Conservative Party has changed before. It managed to recover from the thrashing that Blair gave it, and it changed in 2010 to an attempt at Blair 2. It's been thrashed since because it's being outflanked on the right by both the Labour Party and Reform. But I believe it can change again. There's no reason it can't change again. Reform can't change. It can't change because it's centered around one person, and that one person refuses to change. Now, the Tories don't inspire much when it comes to Kemi Badenoch, but if she continues to not inspire, if it doesn't look like their fortunes are going to turn with her, they will get rid of her, the same way they got rid of everyone else. And when they get rid of her, they'll get rid of her and put someone else in place, most likely Robert Jenrick, who will inspire some more confidence. And if he doesn't inspire it, then he's got to go too. And they'll do that until they find a winning formula, and they'll do it until they win. Reform doesn't have that kind of iterative, evolutionary process.
But the same problem with the Conservative Party changing the greeter on the door, but keeping the same sort of people in the C-suite executive, is the same problem that Reform's got, I think. But so we're seeing the fish rot from the head down in Reform. That's because Farage has cut off all the tall poppies that were coming up around him, the enterprising young talent, and has closed up the drawbridge to anyone else coming in, whether that's, commentators, think tanks, new media strategy. And as much as you say he's got his TikTok, that's controlled in-house. If you've noticed, every time they've tried to respond to Rupert Lowe, it's because it's been the day after and it's been released for the Telegraph. It's not just engagement on X. When they have engaged on X, they've pursued the dialectic. They've ended up admitting that these charges against Lowe, which, by the way, they called the police on him. Like, that's mental. There's no negotiation when you basically admit, I want my critic to rot in a cell on some very spurious charges rather than listen to him. When they have engaged in it, they've been ratioed on Twitter because they just keep getting their messaging wrong. So they've got this very tightly controlled in-house media strategy. They've brought all of their people in-house. They've put people like Nicholas Lizak on Isabel Oakeshot's payroll as some
Researcher.
AstroTurfed influencer, some weird little apologist gremlin who goes in the comments. I'm sick of these people. I don't care about her. They've got some.
This show's very personal. This show's very personal. We heard Lewis Brackpool's gripes with Farage. We've got your gripes with Nicholas Lissack. This show's very personal.
It's not even personal because I don't know the chap. I just don't like people who are
obvious flatterers.
Yeah, exactly. Sycophants, as you've already said. There's Dan Stevens, who works for the comms of Richard Tice as well. George Simpson, who immediately, as this thing went out about Lowe, was like, we need to move on. We need unity, throwing him under the Brexit bus. Because all of these people have their careers reliant on sucking up to Farage. The same thing's in the Tory party. I mean, we've already been over how Dougie Smith and Munira Mirza basically control candidate selection. These people wheeled in Rishi Sunak. They've propped up Kemi Badenoch's career. And they don't seem to be learning. And so if they get rid of Kemi, they'll put some other stooge in there. And the people in CCHQ that made these rotten policies are still going to be in there. I don't see how, even if you
well,
change
the difference is when you say that there's a difference between a party in which the head can change and a party in which only the body can change. Well, if the fish rots from the top, then you're never going to have a good body. That's it. You're saying it's rotting from the body and going upwards towards the head. Well, if you put the person in charge and says, okay, well, we're going to change around CCHQ and going to do all these things, there's not really much of anything that those people can do because everyone will look and say, well, this person was elected and is leader of the party. You're not elected. Well, we're going to go with you, the elected person. So I do believe that it can change. And that's one of those opinions that I'm putting in the bank. It's one of those opinions where it's not going to be popular right now to say the Conservative Party can change. I think it will be successful. I think it will defeat reform. But maybe not the next election, but the election after that, I think people will look and say that the Conservative Party, maybe it's not changed as much as I would like, but nonetheless, I think it will have almost decisively beaten reform. I don't think Farage has that many elections left in him. And if Farage leaves, what happens then? Well, things revert to the mean and it goes back to the Tory party. Will it be an impressive Tory party? Probably not. Will it be the second party in a two-party system? Yes.
I think you're right on that. Before I take over from Steamroll Harrison, the acid-tongued analyst Jacques Hughes put out a piece last week that said the danger of the reform civil war is recreating the pre-2010 election conditions where you had UKIP and the BNP duking it out on the right, one an explicitly racist party, and you've got these sort of marginal parties coming up from the ranks now, and Reform, which is much like UKIP, embittered by infighting at the time, still nascent to the cult of personality around Farage. Labour have become radioactively unpopular already under Keir Starmer, as they were under Brown, and so this let David Cameron carry the Ming-Vars over the line with a coalition government with the Lib Dems round his ankle. And so you could have it where Robert Jenrick doesn't change the composition of the party, and so they're still Lib Dems, but he looks like a talk and hopefully walk right governing Conservative leader and goes into number 10 by default.
That's why I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to see that kind of change, who agrees with the analysis that we might end up with a sort of 2010 conditions going forward if reform collapses. I think the most important for those things is to make those changes before it gets past the line. Because once an election is won, and I saw this again in 2019 with Boris Johnson, once an election is won, that's it. All of that kind of change and stuff stops. They go, we've got the winning formula, we stick with this until we have the next duffer in to come and sort it out again. And being in the Conservative Party in 2019, which you were, it was like being Cassandra. You were sitting there saying, this immigration, it's record levels high. We are not going to win the next election. And you have the people within the party telling you, but he's done so good on coronavirus. He's done so good on Ukraine. We're going to walk the next election. Starmer's shit. That's what they were saying. And then outside the party, you had people saying, oh, the immigration stuff's not a big deal. It's like the third most talked about issue because there's a war in Europe and there's coronavirus. And at the time, many people, including myself, were saying, have a look. Immigration is a perennial issue. It's going to affect us for the rest of our lives because it involves the people in the country who surround us. And it's been an issue that we've been voted into office to solve for 14 years. We can't win the next election doing this, and we can't ride on coronavirus and Ukraine because those issues will inevitably have to fade into the background. And they did fade into the background, and we did lose that election, and we lost it big time on immigration. And it's why getting those things past the line now is so important. It's why what the people in the Conservative Party do now is probably the most interesting and influential thing that's probably going to be happening in British politics right now. But all of that banks on Reform not making it either in the next election or the election after that, or whenever Farage decides to dip out of politics again and put the seat warmer back in place.
Before we should actually probably talk, because there are rumours rumbling around. It'd be interesting to get your views on it, Adam, particularly given what you've just been saying, predicting about the future likely political fortunes of the Conservative Party. Will there be a kind of comeback that seems unexpected at this stage? But it's worth mentioning as well, it's somewhat suspicious how the official Reform UK case against Lowe has insidiously morphed from one to do with bullying and HR and calling the police. And for a second, I thought they were going to bring Sue Gray in to arbitrate misconduct. He says this about the grooming gangs. He is hammering too hard on mass deportations, even saying things like, well, he's gone down some very sort of dark corners to do with the online right, which is a term, hello by the way, which is a term that's flying around a lot. And I must say that I regard this term as pretty incoherent and confusing, because everyone's online. Like, this is just, you by saying that something is an online right point of view, you don't invalidate the point of view. You actually need to make an argument against it. Otherwise, you're mistaking the medium for the truth or the strength of the message. It's also worth saying that this is just, in many ways, people on the left and people on the right have talked about how this has completely remade our politics. It can't, on the one hand, be indicative of a structural transformation of the public sphere and totally irrelevant. That's like calling Protestantism in the 16th century print Christianity, because people like Martin Luther made use of the printing press. I mean, that actually was a pretty big deal in the 16th century. And likewise, the online restructuring of the public sphere is significant as well. So it's a completely incoherent argument. But nevertheless, it does show that this has gone from being this war against Rupert Lowe, what you have called an assassination. Both Con and I would agree with that. It's gone from being putatively about conduct to being quite expressly about ideological substance, seemingly vindicating the idea that it was all a crock of nonsense from the beginning, don't you think?
Well, the accusations will escalate as they get more desperate. I mean, it starts with, there's been some complaints. The smart thing for us to do is to distance ourselves, and we're going to forget about it. And then they remove the whip, because that's the aim of the accusations to begin with. Then it's, oh, well, also he threatened the Zia Youssef.
But it is suspicious they spent, if it was credible and imminent, nearly 4 months to report it, and they just so happened to report it the day after the Mail piece went out, while Elizabeth Bishop was smiling like the Cheshire Cat.
Well, what's curious about it is that when two UKIP MEPs fought each other at European Parliament, Farage said that this is just something that happens between men. How can you have people fighting on the floors of European Parliament and then say that that's just something that happens between men, but a man threatening to fight someone, possibly, we don't know what he said. Maybe he did say, I'm going to slit your throat. But I somehow doubt that.
The party is going to slit its own throat.
That's what he claims he said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which I believe, but
I can't defend anything that Lowe said until I know what he said. Yes. But consider, even if it was a threat of violence, if you've had literal violence committed by people under your watch, and then said it's just something that happens between men, I don't see how you can take just stating violence as something that has to be cracked down upon in that way. So, I mean, the accusations are escalating. And now it's this, he's flirting with this online right. But if you go and look at some of the things that even mainstream outlets are talking about, like social housing, they have their origins in the so-called online right. There's no denying that the internet has significant political influence over people's views. And in that case, I don't see how Nigel, especially someone who's courted it on places like TikTok as well, can then turn around and say this is going down some dark territory.
Yes. And very quickly, it's worth saying that people who maybe don't frequent X very much might assume that the online right is just a bunch of idiotic nitwits. And there's no question that if anyone looks at their comments, you do just get some very low IQ commentary from people who are not actually interested in the questions. They're just attacking people personally. They're just enjoying the anonymity. There is definitely that sort of low grade side to online discourse generally. It doesn't even really make sense to call it the online right. You're likely to find it on the left or in the or among FBPE types.
Have you ever been on Reddit?
Exactly. But a lot of online right commentary, a lot of it is anonymous, a lot of it's very intelligent, a lot of it's very thoughtful. And you're right, this stuff is usually slowly laundered into more mainstream discourse. A good example was with Max Tempers with the rape gangs recently. He's an anonymous account, and he some of the transcripts from trials resurfaced, and all of a sudden Elon Musk was tweeting about it, and all of a sudden there was a national debate.
Which is what Nigel Farage is now saying, I've got a credible record on campaigning.
Exactly.
It was only propelled into public limelight and actually sort of made Rupert Lowe's national name because an anonymous account was tweeting about it after Sam Bidwell had an argument with Fraser Nelson, for example. Or the other one is, as you mentioned, the social housing stats. People like Matt Goodwin, who are in Reform's wheelhouse and defending Farage at the moment, are using maps that were developed by accounts like Aylmer and Juice, who you should follow, by the way, on X. So you should be crediting these people, because a lot of arguments in the immigration restrictionist camp are made off of the backs of hard work and data that people who, frankly, if they put their names to it, it would cost them their careers, but they're still doing kind of public service, and it gives permission to these frontline politicians to say these things with evidence backing it up.
Exactly. And very quickly, so just before to close this segment, I think it was the real smoking gun is when Richard Tice was pushed by Camilla Tominey on GB News. If he is cleared of all misconduct, both HR process related and criminally related, because of this daft report that's been made to the police, which I'm sorry, is just in and of itself disqualifying. It was of a serious right-wing movement to report someone to the police for hurty words. I mean, what supposed to be one of the...
How can you criticise Starmer?
Exactly. How can you criticise Starmer now? So we've got all that going on, and Richard Tice was asked, if cleared of that, will you reinstate him? And the answer was basically no. Although
we had the whip withdrawn, we're going on that assumption.
Exactly. So have they basically given the game away there, or do you think that more digging?
They gave the game away when they took the whip away after accusations. I mean, even the Conservative Party will generally wait until an investigation, either internally or externally, is finished to do that. That's the standard procedure for both parties.
Okay.
You just have to look at how quickly they move on it. The accusations were made. There's this police report the day after a Daily Mail article, and then the whip is immediately withdrawn. It's just clear that these are pretenses that they can feed to the media in order to say that's why it was withdrawn, and then they can just sort of bluff their way through the rest of it, and then it's just an assassination.
Lee Anderson should know better, because Lee Anderson is the chief whip of reform. He put his name to this statement. Remember, Lee Anderson was thrown out of the Conservative Party because he criticised Sadiq Khan for having a light touch on the pro-Hamas protesters every weekend and Wednesday in Westminster, and alluding to his career-long history of parking in his cab rank outside Finsbury Park Mosque because all he ever did was defend Islamic terrorists as a lawyer. And for that, he was expelled from the Conservative Party and joined Reform. Now, he should know that sometimes the process itself is the punishment. It's just the pretext for ousting critics. And yet he has still signed his name on this and treated Rupert Lowe with such contempt.
Well, that's who Lee Anderson is. If you remember the Rwanda bill going through, and he was going to vote against it, said he was going to vote against it. He was one of the main proponents of voting against it. He goes out into the lobby, and some Labour MPs chuckle and laugh at him. And then he goes, "Oh, I can't let them laugh at me like that. I better go back in and vote." And he changed his vote because people laughed at him. I mean, this is the kind of politics you're going to get. You're going to get your decisions made by people whose ego and desire to harm perceived opposition is going to drive their politics. And that politics might work if you're an opposition. I think Nigel is very good at pushing people with power to make blunders, mistakes, and do what he wants. But once you're in a position of power, there's no one to kick against anymore. You are the power. And that's why when you look at whenever UKIP or Reform get into high positions of leadership, they almost immediately bungle it because there's nothing to kick against. That's what I believe Reform is.
It's rare that I recommend Lenin to people, but he did come out with a very good remark about political strategy, which I think feeds into what you're saying. In any sort of political endeavor, you need to have your heart on fire, and your brain on ice. And too often with populist energy, it doesn't get converted into practical plans for government because it's just all, I hope that wasn't too noisy for everyone, because it's just all power and all brimstone and all fury. We should get back to the Tory party quickly, because this is interesting. Rupert Lowe hasn't really ruled out rumours that he might join the Conservative Party. I suppose a three-part question. Do you think it would be good for Lowe to join the Tory party? Do you think it would be good for the Tory party for Lowe to join the Tory party? And do you think it would be good for the country for Lowe to join the Tory party?
I think that for Lowe to join the Conservative Party, I mean, maybe it would be good for his political career in that it gives him a solid party to stand with, but it's going to alienate a lot of people who left the Conservative Party for Reform. But what's interesting about Reform's vote is that the majority of people who moved to Reform were people who never voted before, the same kind of cohort that got vote leave across the line. So I think that it might not be as negative for his fortunes as people think. Whether or not Lowe himself wants that is another issue, because he was a referendum party candidate. And every time I've brought up the possibility of Lowe joining, people say, well, he's been out of the Tories for so long, he used to be a Tory, he stood in the referendum party, and those people really hated the Conservative Party. But I think time has passed and he's been kicked out of Reform. So what's he to do? I mean, if he wants to make the most of this political career, then he probably will have to go with the Conservatives. But there's another option on the table where he continues to remain independent and he works really, really hard for his constituents, and his constituents like him so much they put him back in place. That then means that there's a cap on how influential Rupert Lowe can be as an independent MP. And maybe he'll make a decision in the future about whether he wants to continue, try and re-court Reform. I don't think that would work. Or try and join the Conservative Party, or, as people suggest, start a party himself, which I think would be a fool's errand.
Why?
Because I just laid out all the reasons why I think it's really, really difficult for third parties to get anywhere in British politics.
Is it not useful, though, to form a kind of external pressure group, and it would either supersede Reform as the third place party by snapping up the talent they've left, or if you don't think Farage has much of an election cycle left in him, then you form a parallel power base, and then it either gets folded into Reform eventually when Farage hands the reins off to someone more amenable or less competent at stitching things.
I don't think Farage would hand the reins off. I mean, he's going to remain the owner of Reform 2025.
I think kind of by hand the reins off, he means Farage gets bored and up sticks and goes elsewhere. Like,
but he will remain the owner of the party.
Indeed. So, but I think the idea is that it's a parallel structure that whatever's left of Reform, I suppose the idea, you're not talking about the technical corporate body that is Reform. You're talking more about the personnel of Reform, and the personnel of this parallel power structure would merge in some way or another. Like whatever the technical arcana of the merger and acquisition there doesn't really matter.
But I mean, the people who
is that your point, Colin?
Yes, but it would be contingent on said democratization going through, which I think is what you're suggesting isn't going to happen because Farage and Yusuf are going to share.
It's not going to happen. I mean, there's a certain extent to which Farage is right not to democratize the party, because a lot of the people within it will take it as carte blanche to say and do what they want. And many of the people in Reform are, well, they're loose cannons. But if you go ahead and you look at what the party needs to do, it does need to give people power, because it's only if they have enough power that they can prove that they're able to wield that power effectively and then be promoted upwards. Otherwise, it's just hoping that Farage has a broad enough eye that he can see all of these different people and pick and choose the most talented. That works when you've only got 5 slots to fill. But if you're talking about a majority, you have to find 100 to 200 people in amongst a party of 200,000 people. So that's not going to happen. So
you've got to find people willing to stand once you've already called the police on one MP.
Yes, precisely. So the idea that there's going to be a sort of merger between Reform and this hypothetical third party, I mean, we're really into the weeds now. We're talking about like a hypothetical of a hypothetical. And so there's an extent to which it's not worth spending too much time talking about it. But I also don't believe that Farage would do a merger with anyone, not even the Tories, unless he was going to come back as a conqueror and take over the Conservative Party. But the people in the Conservative Party have egos too, and they wouldn't want that to happen.
I don't fully understand. So I agree that it's a sort of it's a complex hypothetical, but I think that the two hypothetical inputs into the hypothetical, getting very metaphysical, are
they're not possibilities.
They're plausible. They're highly plausible. I don't think they're just possibilities. I think they're plausible. I think it's likely. I mean, if Lowe's not going to join the Tories, which you seem to be suggesting he won't, if he's obviously not, there's obviously not going to be a reconciliation with Reform. That's ruled out. He must be aware. He's talked about the fact that he fundamentally wants to change the way in which the country is governed. He won't be able to do that as an independent MP. So all of those 3 outcomes in terms of Lowe's next move are ruled out. there may be a fifth, but the fourth one that immediately comes to my mind is launching some kind of new party. So it is highly plausible that a new party could be launched.
With the support of the likes of Ben.
With the support of all of the strewn corpses who will be revived and may end up forming its talent base.
Necromancy party.
Yes, indeed. The Necromancy party.
The Scorned Exes party might be a bit better.
It's giving a whole new... the Resurrection Party. There are all these sort of R's in reform, restoration, renewal, reinvigorate, reclaim. They're getting very technical and complicated. So that's plausible. And then in addition to that, I think it is also plausible, particularly if, as you have yourself already predicted, reform doesn't win the next election. How many more elections does Farage have in him? So it's also highly plausible that he would up sticks, maybe go to America, get bored of British politics. So by 2029, we may have this basically reform party without a head anymore. With all of the enthusiasm, well, probably less enthusiasm, but still with the 200,000 members or so that it has, or whatever it might be, and this parallel party, like surely something profitable can emerge from that. It is worth talking about.
It is worth talking about to an extent, but I mean, we had a similar situation in the run-up to the last election where you had Reclaim with Lawrence Fox.
They didn't stand any candidates.
You're right, they did stand any candidates, but everyone in those camps who was in the market for a right-wing opposition to the Tories, every single one of those people, whenever I spoke to them, would tell me, oh man, we'd all like to join up and form some sort of big Mighty Morphing Power Rangers party where we all get together and we basically all have our own separate little things going on, but we can really take it to the Tories. But that's not how, but it never works out because the people at the heads of those parties have their own egos and they all want to be top dog. And if Farage saw, oh, look, this party's going to merge together and it's going to be a realistic and viable opportunity.
He'd want to lead
would want to lead it and he would want to swoop in. And he would also be in charge of the organization which owns the party. And then he would say, well, we're not going to do that merger because that would be a threat to my own credibility. So that's what it is. I just don't see it happening. It's one of those right-wing pipe dreams where everyone just gets along and then we all get together, stick it to the Tories, we institute based world and all's hunky-dory.
This is the pitch. No, okay, we could go on for this for much longer. We must get you back soon to
war game this out.
To trace other sort of hypotheticals and conditionals. One thing I do confess to being quite confused about is that you and I were coming up here and we were talking, and you said that you were very optimistic, and yet you've been shooting down all of our routes to instituting based world. Why are you optimistic then?
Why am I optimistic? It's because, simply put, the problems that we face, they are enormous and they are difficult, but they're not impossible. It can be done. It's simply that people get very bogged down in the actual goings-on of things to actually go and look at what it takes to solve certain problems. I mean, one of the things that is in the news lately is something like asylum, and specifically the need to handle the illegal immigration coming into the country. But even that issue, which is so pertinent and so prescient, and it seems like even the Labour government with its big majority and all of its tough talk can't do it. In 2002, the number of asylum applicants was higher, and it was higher under Blair. And by the time that Blair left office, it was down to about 10 to 20,000 applying per year. And that's because he did an enormous number of things with someone like Jack Straw. They instituted Detain Fast Track. They limited the number of appeals that a person can have. They did a huge reconsideration of the way that the IND handled asylum cases. The problems that we're facing, they can be solved. And in most cases, they've been solved 20 years prior. And so when people bring these problems to me, all of the problems that I'm hearing are what's the ideal vehicle by which we can achieve it?
Exactly.
And that part is the most difficult part of all.
Okay.
But the actual solutions, they can be done. And so what matters now is talking seriously about whether or not reform has what it takes to actually reform the country, or if not, what is the next vehicle? And it's unpopular to say it now, but I'll say it now because I think in 4, 8, 12 years' time, it'll be a much more popular opinion that vehicle is going to end up being the Conservative Party for all of its faults and for all of its failures the last 14 years, who I don't deny them, no one else can deny them. But coming to terms with that and the party changing, which I believe it can do, is going to be the way in which things get done in this country.
We have a prediction on record. Adam, it's been a great privilege. Thank you for joining us on Deprogrammed. Connor, thank you very much.
Pleasure as always.
As ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, do leave a comment if you'd like to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.